In this episode of Culinary Cuisine Journey, we dive into the heart of Argentina's meat culture, a nation where beef isn't just a food, but a symbol of national identity. From the rugged pampas where gauchos once roamed to the bustling parillas of Buenos Aires, meat has long been central to Argentina's life. However, as global concerns about sustainability and ethics rise, Argentina faces the challenge of reconciling its deep-rooted traditions with modern demands for more responsible consumption. Join us as we explore how this country, known for its world-class beef, is navigating the complexities of ethical meat consumption while honoring its rich culinary heritage. From gaucho traditions to cutting-edge sustainable practices, this episode offers a flavorful journey into the evolving landscape of Argentina's meat industry. Argentina's relationship with meat, particularly beef, is deeply intertwined with its national identity. Known for its vast pampas or grasslands and the iconic gaucho culture, Argentina has built a reputation as a meat-loving nation. The country's culinary traditions are rooted in the art of asado, a social and gastronomic event centered around grilling beef over an open flame. To understand Argentina's culinary identity, one must first appreciate the significance of meat in the daily lives and traditions of its people. The origins of Argentina's meat culture can be traced back to the 16th century, when Spanish colonizers introduced cattle to the region. The fertile plains of the Pampas proved to be an ideal environment for raising cattle, and over time, livestock farming became a cornerstone of Argentina's economy. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the gauchos, Argentina's cowboys, emerged as cultural icons. These skilled horsemen roamed the Pampas, herding cattle and living a rugged, nomadic lifestyle that became synonymous with freedom and self-reliance. The gauchos' way of life revolved around cattle, and their traditions helped shape Argentina's enduring love affair with beef. Asado, the traditional Argentine barbecue, is more than just a method of cooking. It's a social institution. Typically held on weekends or special occasions, an asado brings together family and friends to enjoy various cuts of beef, often cooked slowly over a wood or charcoal fire. The preparation and consumption of meat during an asado are rituals that reflect the importance of beef in Argentine culture. From the selection of the meat to the careful tending of the fire, every step is carried out with reverence. The result is a meal that's not only about sustenance, but also about community, tradition, and the celebration of Argentina's rich culinary heritage. Today, Argentina ranks among the top beef consumers in the world, with the average Argentine eating around 55 to 60 kilograms of beef per year. This level of consumption reflects the country's deep-rooted connection to cattle farming and the cultural significance of beef. Whether it's a tender beef de chorizo, sirloin steak, or a succulent costilla, ribs, beef is the star of many Argentine meals. The popularity of meat is evident, not only in homes, but also in the country's restaurants, where parillas, steakhouses, serve up expertly grilled meats to eager patrons. However, Argentina's meat culture is not just about quantity, it's about quality. Argentine beef is renowned for its flavor, largely due to the country's practice of raising cattle on grass rather than grain. The grass-fed diet, coupled with the vast open spaces of the Pampas, results in beef that is both lean and flavorful. This emphasis on quality has helped Argentina maintain its reputation as a leading producer of premium beef, with exports reaching markets around the globe. Despite the centrality of meat to Argentine cuisine, there is a growing awareness of the environmental and ethical implications of large-scale meat production. Argentina's cattle industry has historically been a significant contributor to deforestation, particularly in the northern regions where forests have been cleared to make way for grazing land. Additionally, cattle farming is associated with high levels of methane emissions, a potent greenhouse gas that contributes to climate change. These environmental concerns, coupled with global discussions on animal welfare, have led to a re-evaluation of meat consumption practices in Argentina. Argentina's meat culture is a rich tapestry woven from centuries of tradition, economic reliance, and culinary pride. From the gauchos of the pampas to the modern-day asado, beef is more than just a food item. It's a symbol of national identity. As we explore the ethical dimension of meat consumption in later parts of this podcast, it's important to understand this cultural context. For many Argentines, meat is a way of life, a tradition passed down through generations that embodies the spirit of the nation. However, as global perspectives shift towards sustainability and ethical eating, Argentina faces the challenge of balancing its proud meat-centric heritage with modern environmental and ethical concerns. While Argentina's meat culture is celebrated worldwide, it's increasingly under scrutiny due to ethical concerns related to environmental sustainability, animal welfare, and economic pressures. As a major player in the global beef market, Argentina faces the challenge of addressing these issues without compromising its deeply ingrained culinary traditions and economic reliance on the meat industry. One of the most significant ethical concerns surrounding Argentina's meat industry is its environmental impact. Cattle farming, particularly on a large scale, is associated with several environmental issues, including deforestation, water use, and greenhouse gas emissions. In Argentina, much of the deforestation occurs in the northern regions, such as the Gran Chaco, where forests are cleared to create grazing land for cattle. This deforestation not only destroys biodiversity, but also contributes to climate change by releasing stored carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Additionally, cattle farming is water-intensive. The production of beef requires vast amounts of water, not just for the cattle themselves, but also for growing the grass and feed they consume. In regions where water resources are already scarce, this can lead to a significant environmental stress. Furthermore, the use of water for cattle farming often competes with the needs of local communities, exacerbating issues of water scarcity and access. Perhaps the most pressing environmental concern related to Argentina's meat industry is its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions. Cattle produce methane, a potent greenhouse gas, as part of their digestive process. Methane is significantly more effective at trapping heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, making cattle farming a major contributor to global warming. In Argentina, where cattle outnumber people by nearly 2 to 1, the cumulative effect of methane emissions is substantial. These environmental challenges are not unique to Argentina, but the country's reliance on beef production magnifies their impact. As the world grapples with the realities of climate change, there is increasing pressure on Argentina to find ways to reduce the environmental footprint of its cattle industry. Another ethical concern in Argentina's meat industry is the treatment of animals. While Argentina is known for its grass-fed cattle, which generally have better living conditions compared to animals raised in confined feedlots, there are still significant animal welfare issues to consider. The scale of meat production in Argentina often leads to practices that prioritize efficiency over the well-being of the animals. For example, the transportation of cattle to slaughterhouses can be a stressful and inhumane process. Cattle are often transported long distance in crowded trucks with little regard for their comfort or safety. This can result in injuries and even death before the animal reaches the slaughterhouse. Additionally, the conditions in some slaughterhouses have been criticized for being inhumane, with concerns about the methods used to kill the animals and the treatment they receive leading up to their slaughter. There is also the issue of branding and castration, practices that are common in cattle farming and often performed without anesthesia. While these practices are traditional and seen as necessary for managing large herds, they raise ethical questions about the suffering inflicted on the animals. In recent years, there has been a growing movement within Argentina and globally to improve animal welfare standards in the meat industry. This includes calls for more humane treatment during transportation and slaughter, as well as the adoption of practices that minimize pain and stress for the animals. However, implementing these changes on a large scale remains a challenge, especially in a country where the meat industry is such a vital part of the economy. The economic importance of the meat industry in Argentina cannot be overstated. Beef is not only a staple of the Argentine diet, but also a major export product, generating significant revenue for the country. As a result, any efforts to reform the industry, whether for environmental or animal welfare reasons, must contend with the economic realities of a nation that depends heavily on meat production. For many small and medium-sized farmers, cattle farming is their livelihood. These farmers often lack the resources to invest in more sustainable or humane practices, which can be costly and require significant changes to their operations. For example, transitioning to organic or regenerative farming methods, which are more environmentally friendly, can be prohibitively expensive for farmers who are already operating on thin margins. Moreover, the global demand for Argentine beef adds another layer of complexity. As one of the world's top beef exporters, Argentina faces pressure to meet international demand, which often prioritizes quantity over quality or ethical considerations. Export markets, particularly in Asia and Europe, expect a steady supply of beef, which can incentivize practices that prioritize production efficiency at the expense of environmental and animal welfare concerns. The government also plays a significant role in the meat industry, providing subsidies and support to cattle farmers to help maintain the country's competitive edge in the global market. While these policies are crucial for supporting the economy, they can sometimes conflict with efforts that promote more sustainable and ethical practices. Balancing these competing interests is a complex challenge for policymakers and industry leaders. In Argentina, meat is more than just a food product. It's a cultural symbol, a source of national pride, and a significant economic driver. However, as the ethical concerns surrounding the meat industry become more pressing, the country faces a difficult balancing act. On one hand, there's a strong desire to preserve Argentina's meat-centric culinary traditions and support the livelihoods of farmers. On the other hand, there's a growing recognition that changes are needed to address the environmental and animal welfare issues associated with large-scale cattle farming. As we move forward in this episode, we explore how Argentina is navigating these challenges. From innovative farming practices to shifts in consumer behavior, Argentina is beginning to embrace more ethical approaches to meat production. However, the road ahead is not without obstacles, and finding a path that honors both tradition and ethics will require creativity, commitment, and collaboration from all stakeholders involved. In Argentina, the image of the gaucho, an independent, rugged cowboy roaming the vast pampas, is deeply embedded in the national consciousness. The gaucho is more than just a historical figure. He represents the spirit of freedom, self-reliance, and connection to the land that has shaped Argentina's cultural identity. Central to the gaucho way of life is cattle ranching, a tradition that has given rise to some of Argentina's most iconic culinary practices, such as the asado. However, as the world moves toward more sustainable and ethical approaches to food production, the contrast between these time-honored traditions and modern ethical concerns has become increasingly stark. The gaucho's life on the pampas, Argentina's expansive grasslands, was built around cattle. For centuries, gauchos herded cattle across these plains, using traditional methods that had been passed down through generations. Their skills in horseback riding, cattle wrangling, and meat preparation became legendary, and their lifestyle came to symbolize the essence of Argentine culture. The gaucho's role in Argentina's meat industry is one of reverence and the practices they developed, such as open-fire grilling and long cattle drives, are still celebrated today. The asado, a social gathering centered around the grilling of meat, is perhaps the most enduring legacy of gaucho culture. At an asado, large cuts of beef are slowly cooked over an open flame, with family and friends gathering to share in the feast. The asado is more than just a meal, it's a ritual that celebrates community, tradition, and Argentina's deep connection to its cattle ranching roots. This practice, which originated with the gauchos, remains a central part of the Argentine life, particularly in rural areas where these traditions are so closely tied to the land. While the gaucho tradition is celebrated, it also presents an ethical dilemma in the modern world. The methods of cattle ranching that have been practiced for centuries are now being scrutinized for their environmental impact and animal welfare issues. The vast expanses of land required for cattle grazing, while once seen as limitless, are now recognized as vulnerable ecosystems that need protection. Deforestation, particularly in northern Argentina, is a direct result of expanding cattle ranching, as forests are cleared to create more grazing land. This destruction of natural habitats has significant consequences for biodiversity and contributes to climate change. Moreover, the traditional methods of cattle ranching, which often involve branding and castration without anesthesia, raise ethical questions about animal welfare. While these practices were developed out of necessity in a different era, they are increasingly seen as incompatible with modern standards of humane treatment. The romantic image of the gaucho riding across the pampas with his cattle must now be reconciled with the realities of animal suffering and environmental degradation. In addition to these concerns, there is the issue of scale. What worked for small traditional cattle ranches may not be sustainable or ethical when applied to industrial scale operations. The practices that once defined gaucho culture have been amplified in modern times, with large-scale cattle farming leading to greater environmental and ethical challenges. This shift from small, traditional operations to industrial farming has magnified the impact of these practices, making it more difficult to justify them in a context of today's global concerns. One of the significant challenges in addressing these ethical concerns is the cultural resistance to change. For many Argentines, particularly those in rural areas, cattle ranching is not just a livelihood, but a way of life. The traditions associated with gaucho culture are deeply ingrained, and any attempt to reform or regulate the industry is often met with skepticism or outright opposition. There is a perception that modern ethical concerns, particularly those related to animal rights and environmental sustainability, are at odds with the values of rural communities that have relied on cattle ranching for generations. This resistance is compounded by a sense of national pride in Argentina's meat culture. Beef is a symbol of Argentina's wealth and global influence, and the idea of reducing meat consumption or altering traditional practices can feel like an affront to national identity. The asado, for example, is a point of pride for many Argentines, and any suggestion that it should be changed to accommodate ethical concerns is likely to be met with strong resistance. Despite these challenges, there are efforts within Argentina to find a balance between preserving gaucho traditions and addressing modern ethical concerns. Some cattle ranchers are exploring more sustainable and humane methods of farming that align with ethical standards without abandoning their cultural heritage. For example, regenerative farming practices, which focus on restoring the health of the land and reducing environmental impact, are gaining traction among some ranchers. These practices involve rotating grazing areas, restoring native vegetation, and reducing the use of chemicals, all of which help to minimize the environmental footprint of cattle ranching. Additionally, there is a growing movement within Argentina to raise awareness about animal welfare. Advocacy groups are working to promote more humane treatment of cattle, from improved conditions during transport to more ethical methods of slaughter. While these efforts are still in their early stages, they represent a shift in thinking that could lead to more widespread changes in the industry. At the same time, there is a need for dialogue between rural communities and those advocating for ethical reforms. Bridging the gap between tradition and modern ethics will require a collaborative approach that respects the cultural significance of cattle ranching while also addressing the pressing ethical concerns of the modern world. Finding common ground will be essential in ensuring that Argentina's meat industry can continue to thrive without compromising its cultural identity or its commitment to sustainability and humane practices. The tension between gaucho traditions and modern ethics is a microcosm of the broader challenges facing Argentina's meat industry. On one hand, the country's rich cultural heritage is deeply tied to cattle ranching, and the practices that have sustained rural communities for generations are a source of national pride. On the other hand, the ethical concerns surrounding environmental sustainability and animal welfare cannot be ignored. As Argentina navigates these complexities, it will need to find innovative solutions that honor its past while embracing the future. This balancing act will not be easy, but it is essential for ensuring that Argentina's meat industry remains both culturally significant and ethically responsible. As the global conversation around sustainability and ethical food production intensifies, Argentina, a nation known for its world-class beef, is beginning to shift towards more sustainable meat practices. While the country's meat industry has long been rooted in traditional methods that prioritize quality, recent years have seen an increasing awareness of the environmental and ethical implications of meat production. In response, a growing number of Argentine farmers, ranchers, and consumers are embracing sustainable practices that aim to reduce the environmental impact of cattle farming, improve animal welfare, and support local communities. One of the most celebrated aspects of Argentina's beef is that much of it comes from grass-fed cattle. This method of raising cattle, where animals graze on natural pastures rather than being confined to feedlots and fed grain, has long been the norm in Argentina. Grass-fed beef is often touted as a more sustainable option compared to grain-fed beef, as it typically involves fewer resources and results in lower greenhouse gas emissions. Additionally, grass-fed cattle are generally raised in more humane conditions, with ample space to roam and engage in natural behaviors. In Argentina, the tradition of raising cattle on the vast pampas has provided a natural advantage in producing high-quality, sustainable beef. The country's geography, with its expansive grasslands, has allowed for a method of cattle farming that is both environmentally and economically viable. Unlike intensive feedlot operations, which can lead to overgrazing, soil degradation, and pollution, grass-fed systems promote healthier ecosystems. Grazing cattle help maintain the balance of grasslands, encouraging plant diversity and preventing desertification. While grass-fed beef has always been a part of Argentina's agricultural landscape, there is a growing recognition of its environmental benefits. Consumers, both domestically and internationally, are increasingly seeking out grass-fed beef for its lower environmental impact and perceived health benefits. This shift in consumer demand has encouraged more farmers to maintain and even expand their grass-fed operations, positioning Argentina as a leader in sustainable beef production. Beyond grass-fed beef, there is a burgeoning movement in Argentina toward organic and regenerative farming practices. Organic farming, which avoids the use of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and genetically modified organisms, GMOs, is gaining popularity as consumers become more concerned about the environmental and health impacts of conventional agriculture. In Argentina, several farms have transitioned to organic methods, producing beef that is not only free from harmful chemicals, but also raised in ways that promote soil health and biodiversity. Regenerative farming, a more holistic approach that goes beyond sustainability, is also making inroads in Argentina's meat industry. This method focuses on restoring and enhancing the natural environment through practices such as rotational grazing, cover cropping, and minimal tillage. By improving soil health, increasing carbon sequestration, and enhancing biodiversity, regenerative farming aims to create a food system that is not just sustainable, but regenerative, meaning it actively contributes to the health of the ecosystem. In the context of cattle farming, regenerative practices involve carefully managing grazing patterns to ensure that the land is not overgrazed. Cattle are moved between different pastures, allowing the grass to recover and reducing the risk of soil erosion. This practice not only benefits the environment, but also improves the quality of the beef, as cattle that graze on a variety of plants tend to produce more flavorful meat. Several pioneering farms in Argentina have adopted regenerative methods with impressive results. These farms have demonstrated that it is possible to produce high-quality beef while also enhancing the health of the land. By focusing on long-term environmental health rather than short-term gains, these farmers are setting a new standard for what ethical and sustainable meat production can look like. The rise of sustainable meat practices in Argentina is not limited to large-scale operations. Across the country, small-scale farmers and local communities are leading the way in promoting ethical and sustainable approaches to meat production. Farmers markets and community-supported agriculture (CSA) programs, where consumers can purchase meat directly from local producers, have become increasingly popular. These initiatives not only support local economies, but also promote transparency and trust between farmers and consumers. By buying directly from local producers, consumers can ensure that their meat comes from farms that prioritize animal welfare and environmental sustainability. This direct relationship between producer and consumer helps to build a food system that is more resilient and less reliant on industrial agriculture. Additionally, supporting local farmers helps to preserve traditional farming methods and prevent the consolidation of agriculture into the hands of a few large corporations. In rural areas, these local initiatives have also had a positive impact on communities. Sustainable farming practices often require more labor and hands-on management, which can create jobs and support local economies. Moreover, by focusing on quality over quantity, these farmers are able to command higher prices for their products, which can produce a more stable and sustainable income. While the rise of sustainable meat practices in Argentina is encouraging, there are still significant challenges to overcome. One of the biggest hurdles is the economic pressure on farmers to produce more meat at lower costs. Transitioning to organic or regenerative methods can be expensive and time-consuming, and many farmers are reluctant to make the switch without financial support or guaranteed markets for their products. Additionally, there is still a significant gap between consumer awareness and action. While more people are becoming aware of the environmental and ethical issues associated with meat production, the demand for cheap, mass-produced beef remains strong. Bridging this gap will require ongoing education and advocacy, as well as policy changes that support sustainable practices and make them more accessible to both farmers and consumers. Despite these challenges, the momentum towards more sustainable and ethical meat production in Argentina is growing. With continued innovation, collaboration, and commitment from all stakeholders, from farmers to consumers, Argentina has the potential to lead the way in creating a meat industry that honors its traditions while embracing the future. The rise of sustainable meat practices in Argentina represents a crucial step towards addressing the environmental and ethical challenges facing the country's meat industry. By building on the traditions of grass-fed beef and embracing organic and regenerative methods, Argentina is showing that it is possible to produce high-quality meat in a way that is both ethical and sustainable. As these practices continue to gain traction, they offer a model for how the meat industry can evolve to meet the demands of the modern world without losing sight of its cultural roots. As Argentina grapples with the complexities of ethical meat consumption, the landscape of how meat is produced, sold, and consumed is gradually evolving. While the country remains deeply connected to its meat-centric traditions, growing awareness around sustainability, animal welfare, and health is leading to significant changes. These shifts are reflected in the rise of consumer consciousness, the increasing availability of sustainable meat options, and the broader conversation about what ethical meat consumption means in a country where beef is more than just food, it's a way of life. In recent years, Argentine consumers have become more aware of the ethical and environmental implications of their food choices. While traditional meat consumption remains high, there is a growing segment of the population, particularly in urban areas, that is beginning to prioritize sustainability and animal welfare. The shift is partly driven by global trends, as well as by the increasing visibility of environmental issues and the influence of international movements advocating for more ethical food systems. In cities like Buenos Aires, more consumers are questioning the origins of their food and seeking out meat that is produced in a way that aligns with their values. This has led to a rise in the popularity of grass-fed, organic, and regenerative beef, as well as an increase in vegetarian and vegan options. Farmers markets and specialty butcher shops that focus on sustainably raised meat are becoming more common, catering to a growing demand for transparency and quality. At the same time, many consumers are reducing their overall meat consumption, either by participating in movements like Meatless Mondays or by choosing smaller portions of higher quality meat. This shift reflects a broader trend toward mindful eating, where people are more conscious of the impact that their food choices have on their health, the environment, and animal welfare. As consumer demand for ethical meat grows, more Argentine farmers and ranchers are adopting sustainable practices to meet this demand. These producers often operate on a smaller scale, focusing on quality rather than quantity. By raising animals on pasture, avoiding the use of synthetic chemicals, and implementing regenerative farming practices, they are able to offer meat that is not only more environmentally friendly, but also aligns with the values of ethically minded consumers. One of the key elements of ethical meat production in Argentina is the emphasis on local sourcing. By buying meat from local producers, consumers can reduce the carbon footprint associated with food transportation and support the local economy. This also fosters a closer relationship between producers and consumers, creating a system where buyers can learn more about how their food is produced and make informed choices. Many of these local producers are also committed to improving animal welfare. They often ensure that their animals have access to pasture, are not subjected to unnecessary stress or pain, and are slaughtered using more humane methods. These practices stand in contrast to industrial farming operations, which are often criticized for prioritizing efficiency over the well-being of animals. In addition to traditional beef, some producers are diversifying their offerings to include other types of meat, such as lamb, pork, and poultry, raised under similar ethical standards. This diversification not only helps to meet consumer demand for variety, but also promotes more sustainable farming practices by allowing for crop rotation and better land management. Despite these positive developments, there are still significant challenges to make ethical meat consumption more widespread in Argentina. One of the main obstacles is cost. Sustainably produced meat is often more expensive than conventionally raised meat, which can make it inaccessible to lower-income consumers. This creates a dilemma for both producers and consumers, as the higher costs associated with ethical practices can limit their adoption and reach. Moreover, there is still a large portion of the population, particularly in rural areas, where traditional meat consumption habits are deeply ingrained and less likely to change. For many Argentines, especially those who have grown up with asados and other meat-heavy traditions, the idea of reducing meat consumption or switching to more expensive, ethically produced options may seem unnecessary or even undesirable. Another challenge is the lack of regulation and certification for ethical meat in Argentina. While there are some organic and sustainable certifications available, they are not as widespread or well-known as in other countries. This makes it difficult for consumers to identify and trust the meat they are buying meets certain ethical standards. Without clearer labeling and more robust certification systems, it will be challenging to scale up the adoption of ethical meat consumption across the country. Despite these challenges, the movement toward ethical meat consumption in Argentina is gaining momentum. As more consumers become aware of the impact of their food choices, and as more producers adopt sustainable practices, there is potential for significant change. Educational campaigns, both at the grassroots level and through media, can play a crucial role in increasing awareness and shifting cultural attitudes toward more sustainable and humane meat consumption. Government policies and incentives could also help drive this change. By providing support for farmers who adopt sustainable practices, such as subsidies for organic certification or grants from implementing regenerative farming techniques, the government could help make ethical meat production more viable and accessible. Additionally, stronger regulations around animal welfare and environmental sustainability could set new industry standards and encourage more widespread adoption of ethical practices. Looking ahead, the future of ethical meat consumption in Argentina will likely involve a combination of preserving cultural traditions while embracing new practices that address modern ethical concerns. For Argentina, a country where beef is a symbol of national identity, finding this balance will be key. As the country navigates these changes, it has the opportunity to redefine its relationship with meat in a way that honors its rich culinary heritage while also promoting a more sustainable and ethical future. Ethical meat consumption in Argentina is a complex and evolving issue. While the country has a long way to go in making ethical practices the norm, there is a growing movement of consumers, producers, and advocates who are pushing for change. By prioritizing sustainability, animal welfare, and local production, Argentina can begin to reshape its meat industry in a way that aligns with modern values while still honoring its deep-rooted traditions. As this movement continues to grow, it will require collaboration, innovation, and a commitment to creating a food system that is both ethical and culturally resonant. As we wrap up today's exploration of ethical meat consumption in Argentina, it's clear that this country, so deeply tied to its beef traditions, is navigating a delicate balance between preserving its cultural heritage and embracing modern ethical practices. From the vast pampas where gauchos once roamed to the rising demand for sustainable grass-fed beef, Argentina is at a crossroads. The movement toward more responsible and humane meat production is growing, but challenges remain. Whether you're an Argentine local or a global foodie, understanding these complexities can help us all make more informed choices that respect both tradition and the planet. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Argentina's evolving meat industry. I hope this episode has provided some food for thought, literally and figuratively. If you're curious about how your food choices impact the world, this is just the beginning of a much larger conversation. And speaking of exploring new frontiers, next time on Culinary Cuisine Journey, we're blasting off into the final frontier, space. On Thursday's episode, we'll dive into the fascinating world of food in space and how astronauts satisfy their cravings while orbiting the Earth. From freeze-dried meals to gourmet dining aboard the International Space Station, we'll uncover the unique challenges and innovations of cooking in zero gravity. It's an episode that promises to be out of this world, so be sure to tune in. Until then, keep exploring, keep tasting, and remember that every meal is an opportunity to make a difference. I'm Kip Ferguson, and it's been a pleasure sharing this culinary journey with you. Bon appetit, and see you next time.